We are going through what looks like a global decrease in the birth rate. I think probably all of us thought, hey, we all know Japan is getting older and they aren't having a lot of babies, but I think we kind of thought it was isolated, and it seems like it's spread all over the world.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey there. Welcome to The New Rules with Alan Pentz, where we help you navigate today's chaos with precision. Your host, Alan Pentz, has 25 years of experience working in business and government, and he knows how the old rules have fallen apart. Each episode, we'll explore how to thrive in this new landscape by mastering the new rules while everyone else is still figuring them out. Let's dive in.
All right, we are back from the New Rules podcast. Well, what are we discussing this week?
Well, you have a bee in your bonnet about demographics, Alan.
I don't have a bee in my bonnet. Everybody else has stopped breeding. I think that's the problem.
Right. No, it's
So-
not you personally, but interesting. So you've been doing some research. We started to talk about this last week.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of like I don't know, it's discussed in certain forums, but I feel like it's not talked about in the press a lot, that we are going through what looks like a global decrease in the birth rate. And, I think probably all of us thought, hey, we all know Japan is getting older and they aren't having a lot of babies, but I think we kind of thought it was isolated, and it seems like it's spread all over the world. So kind of spurred by a McKinsey report. I'd been reading some stuff about it, but McKinsey put out a good report that had some data about it. And what I thought was really interesting is we're kind of going through these waves of decreasing fertility. So we have that sort of first wave that's kind of happening now, and that's really Japan, advanced Asia. China is really part of that. So even countries, I think this was a kind of counterintuitive, that even countries that aren't that wealthy, still have a lot of poverty, are having severe demographic problems. So China obviously had the one China policy for a long time. So that, if you can only have one kid, then your fertility rate is 1. And sort of the theme here is, I use this, it's like how the average number of babies each woman has is basically the factor that I'm looking at. And for replacement, you have to have 2.1 for each woman. So she has to replace herself, her partner, or whatever, the guy in the couple. And then 0.1 of all the other people who die before they become adults. So, and so 2.1 is replacement level. And, we're now at China, we're in 1. South Korea, we're at 0.7, I believe it's gotten down to. So that means within a generation or two, as those older people die off, you're talking about half the number of people, and in South Korea, fewer than half the number of people that are there today, which is insane to me. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen this in human history. We've seen sudden demographic collapses because of something like the Black Death, right, in Europe, where to 2/3, right, half to 2/3 in certain areas. But I think that people started having babies again right away, right after that ended. So that doesn't have the same flavor as this sort of what seems, obviously trends can change, but what seems like a long-term trend toward just lower population. And what happens when half the houses are not lived in, and property prices go down, all asset prices go down. Growth has to slow down, I guess. Growth is, unless we have these miracle technologies, I don't see how growth really continues. And so I just don't think we know the results of this. And it's a little concerning. And it's been going on for a while. Yeah. And so I guess going back to like the 3 waves, right, McKinsey talks about. So you've got that first wave with Europe, which is in the mid 1s, 1.3 to 1.56.
Yeah, it's like 1.4. I think the median average in Europe overall is 1.4. Even lower,
and the U.S.
1.2.
U.S. is a little bit higher, largely because of the immigrant population. So, I think that the native population is 1, 3, or 4. But with the immigrant population, we're at 1.6. And obviously we're
Right.
supplementing, well, we used to be supplementing with a lot of immigrants. And so you're really looking at Canada's like that, Australia, all these sort of developed areas, including maybe medium developed areas like China and large parts of Asia are already we're already done, right? Because as someone said, it takes 30 years to make a 30-year-old. So even if you start today, we're still going to have this population collapse at some point because we've had this period where you have 1 to 1.6 across the developed world, the population. So this is baked in no matter what, even if the trend changes in the future. And so that's sort of happening now and will play out over the next generation. And then there are areas like the Middle East, India, Pakistan, what you consider maybe a little less developed, or they had higher population growth, but they're really at replacement level or just below. And they seem to be trending down. So they see, another wave starting in the 2030s playing out. So they're probably going to hit in the 2030s what would you hit in the 2010s, 2020s. And then they're going to peak then and start going down over the next generation or two. So they got maybe one more generation of replacement level. So,
Sub-Saharan Africa, right?
Right. So Sub-Saharan Africa is the one area that is still, a high level of fertility. I can't remember the average, but it's 4.4 or something like that.
Yeah. I don't
And so, but they're projected by, later in the century to be the third wave to peak in the 2050s, 2060s or something, and then come down. Although, to me, projecting out to 2100 is kind of crazy. But, the trend is down even in Sub-Saharan Africa. It's much farther, they're much higher base than we are. So what they see is this sort of three trends coming, overlapping waves, starting in sort of the northern developed world, going into these, kind of replacement level countries in the Middle East, Pakistan, India, kind of places. And then really by
decline
2050, the only place at replacement level is Sub-Saharan Africa. So I started talking about you got your money in the US now, you're going to have to move it you're going to have to get those Dubai investments going by 2030. And God help you, by 2050, you're investing in Angola or Zimbabwe. So good luck with that. But, so this is a huge, profound change, I think, for the world. And I don't think it's one, it's not one that you see the change today. You go to Tokyo, there's still a lot of people there. You go to Seoul, there's still a lot of people there. China, But the reality is that's going to really, two things you're seeing is first of all, you have these big urban areas where everybody moves to from the countryside. So it kind of covers it up for a while. But so it's going to start showing it's probably already showing. And then over the next 10, 20 years, you're going to see the results. And some people think, I thought it was interesting. I didn't write about this in the article. I think Random Walk talked about this. And there's some other speculation that actually the global financial crisis marked the peak of increasing population in the West. And so it was really in 2008-9 that US, European, all those population, at least increases from the native born population, capped off and started going down. So is there something where everybody has, Japan had their financial crisis in the 80s. That was when their population capped out. And so is there something where, you base your economy on all these people, getting, moving through the demographic stages. So they go from being dead weight with their kids to start consuming and buying a lot of stuff in their 30s and 40s when they're buying houses and furniture and educating their kids and all that kind of stuff. And once that stops increasing, there's still people going through it, but they're fewer each year. And maybe that causes this kind of deflationary financial crisis in each country. So that'll happen in the Middle East, and then it'll happen in Sub-Saharan Africa. So anyway, that's another thing that's kind of interesting. And it is a little concerning that a lot of these countries are going to hit that crisis before they even get wealthy. So if you think about India, China, I mean, Shanghai's wealthy, but the rest of the country's pretty poor still. It's a middle income country. India is still not even middle income. right? Now they're still replacement level for a while, but like, are they going to get wealthy enough before this huge demographic change happens?
Mm.
And so, yeah. So, I mean, that's sort of the basic philosophy or like thought going on.
But I guess before because then, you wrote about things that you have been reading about, well, what can we do about it? Or what are some of the proposals or theories or whatever you want to call them? But I guess the question I had before is why, I mean, it's a rhetorical question to a certain extent, but why should people care? I mean, you sort of touched on, like, why should this be something that keeps people up at night?
Yeah.
I mean, you touched on it a bit earlier, but.
Yeah. So I think that, the one reason I cited is like, you're going to have a decline in asset prices because it's less demand to buy them. So particularly people who have a lot of wealth in their house, in 20 years, maybe that's not worth that much. So, like a decrease in wealth. But I think the real time bomb is the retirement and welfare systems and pension systems and these healthcare in these countries. So obviously everybody's not dying at once, right? They're living much longer as old people, and old people consume a ton of benefits, right? From pensions, retirement, and healthcare, right? So your healthcare costs are high early in life, they go way down, and then they go way back up, like even higher than they were. So you have these societies where the support ratio, so that's the number of workers per retiree, has been steadily declining for, since they were started, right? In the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s. So like I said in the article, like when you started Social Security in the, whatever it was, the 30s, early 40s, there were thousands of workers for every retiree, right? Because there were very few people eligible at the very beginning. And then that quickly started going down and it was like 8 something for a while in the 50s. And then it got down to 4 or 5 in the 60s. And now we're down to 2.8, I think it is.
Yeah, it's 2.8 for every person putting, Yeah.
And so the US is doing a little better there with immigration, but you look at Europe, like within 10, 15 years, you're looking at below 2 people per retiree. Same in Asia. And worldwide, we're going from, 8 or 9 down to 4, something like that, 3.9, I think it was. And so these systems that provide healthcare and pensions to older people are going to collapse at some point. I mean, you just can't pay for it all with 2 people working and that number falling every year. The burden on the only productive people in your society, I mean, not only, but like the most productive people in your society who are working have an increasing burden every year. That's just not going to work. So I think within 10 to 20 years, we're facing, maybe sooner in certain areas, we're facing massive problems with these retirement systems. And the young people just aren't going to be able to support them anymore. And so I think that's really the doomsday scenario, is what happens when old people don't get their benefits anymore.
Yeah, we tell them, you got to go bag groceries part-time on Sunday afternoons, right? Before nap time.
Yeah.
It's just,
so my thought is the first step is what we're doing now, which is like kicking the can and making stuff up, right? So we're going to do that as long as we can, just like layer on more debt, make no sacrifices, right? We got, governments in France that can't get budgets passed. And like the only majority I remember reading in the fall when Macron's government fell, the only majority in the French parliament was to reduce the retirement age.
Yeah.
It's like, that is insane. Like they're going to 64, I guess, under Macron's reforms. And it was at 62. And like Mélenchon kind of
the left.
He wanted to bring it back to 60, And so it's like, hey, these systems are completely unsustainable. And then you're going to make it worse. So I feel like we're still in the denial stage of it. I think, policymakers know that it's going to happen, but, the real crisis probably isn't coming until after they're out of office. And, I don't think it's in 5 years. Maybe it's in 10, 15.
Well, yeah. And it's another generation that people can because we do just think about ourselves, right? Like, why do I have to? My kids aren't going to have to worry about this yet. So who cares?
Right. Exactly. So I think that's the first thing that happens, is just denial. That's sort of what we're in. I think phase 2 is probably stealing money from old people slowly, as I call it.
No, I love that.
Or Russell Napier actually said that. So that he's an economic historian, and so basically that means like inflating away the value of the benefits. So you do various things to like mess with the cost of living adjustment. You devalue the Medicare benefits. You put in more copays, stuff like that. So I think phase 2 is like, hey, let's not make it seem really bad all at once and just gradually grind away your benefits over, some period of time. And then I think eventually in phase 3, people realize that the benefits aren't worth that much anymore. And that causes a political crisis. And so then at that point, there really is no option at that point to make the old people whole because there's not enough workers around.
Right.
So the political crisis will lead to some sort of resolution where we adopt some more extreme policy. And I don't, looking out at that, I don't know what it's going to be. I mean, I think maybe, so I end the article kind of saying, in the end, I think people will start having kids to support them in their old age again, because the benefits aren't worth it.
Which is what people used to do before.
That's what people used to do. So I'm like, if the whole system collapses, or like not collapse, maybe it doesn't collapse, but it erodes to the point where people just really don't view it as a great system anymore, what are they going to do? They're going to go back to doing what they used to do, which is have kids so that they would support them. So maybe the problem fixes itself after some horrible series of events that I don't want to live through, but I think it's going to happen.
Well, let's go back to, because you talked in the article about what some other countries have, like the Nordic countries, for example, like increase their social safety net supports, to support particularly women, working women. They can continue to work, have their careers, have kids, fathers get, or fathers, or whatever, partners get.
Right. So a series of pro-natalist policies.
Sure, pro-natalist policy. That's nice.
Hungary's paying people to have kids, and the more kids you have, the more you get.
That's just
flat out cash.
I like the flat out cash. But none of that seems to work, at least sustainably.
Right. So I'll hit that second. First is like what I've been reading some stuff by this guy, Lyman Stone, who's he's an advocate.
Oh,
so
yeah.
He's a researcher, but he's clearly pro-natalist. So he has motivated reasoning too. So you have to, understand that when you read him. So he's been he did a couple of blog posts on his Substack showing that a lot of the reasons people say that fertility is declining don't really hold up. So people have said, as the world gets wealthier, people have fewer children. And we can see from the data that, there are a lot of times, like poor people are having fewer kids than wealthy people. And then people will say like, it's too much crowding in cities. And again, we could show data where that's not true. Now, a lot of these are like correlative effects, so he says you can't read history, you can't read the data sideways, which means like Italy has a lower population fertility rate, right? It also has more urbanization. It's also wealthier than when it had a high fertility rate. It's also got, better expressive flavors or whatever. All these things all happened at the same time.
Right.
And so you can't walk in and be like, it's because they are richer. Because I don't know, that's just, those things happen inside. Yeah, they're correlated, not causal, right? So I think what he's doing is blowing up a lot of the correlated reasons that aren't causal. And then you look at things like, all right, well, maybe it's because women have to work. And if we didn't have them work, or we supported them, or they don't have enough benefits to support them in early childhood, for when they first have kids, well, you can go to the societies where they've done this stuff, right? First of all, you can find societies where there are a lot of women who don't work and their fertility rates aren't that great. And then if you look at the Nordic countries where they built out like huge social support networks, like a lot of parental leave, a lot of part-time work, a lot of other things. And like
nice daycare.
You get great daycare, which is all great. I'm not saying but it's like it didn't really boost the fertility rate that much. And so what you'll tend to see, like particularly in Hungary, where you're actually just directly paying people, you'll see like, I think what he was saying is there's like a little blip where it goes up, 0.1, 0.2% for a little while, and then it kind of goes
for
back.
a short period of time.
Right. And even if they get you a couple of, basis points, which means, a hundredth of a percentage point, not a percentage point, that's the most you're going to get, it seems like, from these experiments. And like, they don't get you back to replacement. So make it slightly better, but they're not solving the problem, right? And they really, to be honest, they don't seem to do that much, right? And so it's really a conundrum. People are like, what is going on here? How do we stop it? No one's really got an answer. And I think we just have to say we don't know. And the other thing that he cites that I think he does think is compelling, which kind of makes sense to me, is the most correlated thing is the infant mortality rate. So the way he put it is like women or women and couples, whoever, have a certain number of children that they want. And it used to be that they knew some of those children would die, right? So if you want 3, you might have to have 5 or 6. And so people, when there was a lot of infant mortality, people tended to overshoot the number they wanted. And they ended up with more kids than they actually wanted. And now that infant mortality is like almost gone, it's not gone, but it's like way, way down, that women tend to undershoot. And it's not really clear why. Because they say they want more kids than they have.
Because having kids is hard.
Yeah, it's hard. Well, Tonya could say that. So, yeah, you're like, hey, I want 3, and then you have 2. You're
like, yes.
Is that what it is? Right. Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. Well, so you hear
it's true though.
Straight from the mother's mouth here, right?
Straight from the mother's mouth.
That's right. So maybe that's going on. Who knows? And I think the other thing that I've seen people write about is like, obviously, with women working and we're living longer, women are delaying childbirth, right? So part of this might be, so there's some suspicion that women want more kids, but they tend to have them later, so then they can't have as many. So maybe that's part of it. And like, definitely that seems to be the case, but you figure we have IVF. We have countries where, like Denmark, say, where IVF is paid for. So like, one thing is IVF has extended the period of time women can have children, but it's expensive and it hasn't extended it that much, but it has, right? And we haven't seen any change in the demographic figures. I mean,
yeah, that just doesn't seem to make, it's true what you're saying, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem to really explain it to me. I would.
In what sense?
In the sense, sure, like, yeah, we have, now women have access to IVF, but even if all women had access to IVF, I don't think that it would make a significant difference. I think it's more.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
So why?
I don't know. I think
if the reason were that you waited longer and then you couldn't have as many kids as you wanted because you had waited, then IVF should solve that problem, right? But it doesn't appear to have solved it.
I think it's more economic.
Maybe that reason is flawed.
Yeah, I think it's more, at least in, say, a country like the United States. And Europeans feel this, that, they whine about it even more. And they have a far greater social safety net. Everything's too expensive, lack of housing, unaffordable daycare, all the things that we, have heard about for a long time. I think that makes more sense to me.
It does, although you'll find areas where people are poorer that have more fertility, right? So
that's why it doesn't.
So it might be a mismatch of like expectations too. And I actually probably need to do some more research on that, because it's like, we are richer, but we also have much more expectations for our quality of life and like what we should be able to do. And maybe the cost of children is just misaligned with that versus like, there's a bunch of poor people that are poor and they still have a bunch of kids, but it's not like they're like, oh, I could have had this life, but I had this life because I had kids. Right. So maybe there's something there where it's like, but it doesn't feel like when you go to societies where they subsidize that and make it easier that it makes any difference. They have lower fertility rates.
Yeah,
so
that's why
it doesn't seem like that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And
what it is.
So then the other thing I didn't write about that he talks about, and again, I think he's I think the facts are there, but I think he has motivated reasoning, right? Probably more conservative, pro-family. And he said it's highly correlated with male wages. And so one of the biggest correlations for female fertility is male wages. Because basically, if you have a bunch of deadbeat guys that can't support the family, what good are they, right? So, and he says that men are sort of a form of insurance. So even if women work, it's like, hey, if I'm going to have kids with somebody, I want him to be able to like back up the family.
Right.
And if he can't, then what's the point, right? So why would you get married? So you see these falling levels of marriage, and generally you just see like, I don't know. What do you think? So I'd be curious, what's your take on the male wages?
Well, I thought it was interesting. I read that. What's his name? That was the one. Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting because I was reading that and I thought at first, this is going to piss a lot of people off, a lot of women off. Like, lack of birth rates is tied to male wages. And, because you can just hear all.
Right. Oh, so we have to pay men more so I can have babies? Right?
Yeah, I mean, we don't even have to, get into that. But then if you actually read what he's saying, you're like, this makes a little bit more sense, even from an evolutionary perspective. He's like, women used to be out there contributing, let's call it, the household meal back in hunter-gatherer times as much as men. So it's not that women need men, but we need them sometimes, or, we need them sometimes during...
What's the point of them if they don't provide the stick?
Right. When we're pregnant and we're actually, nursing, there are times when, yes, you need that backup. So the way he framed that as men as an insurance policy was very interesting to me. And it didn't piss me off as much as I thought it was going to.
Now it's going to piss off like all the men's rights advocates. We're just an insurance policy.
Right. No, exactly. But it's interesting. I do encourage listeners to read it because, you do have to, you have to read it.
Yeah. Search Lyman Stone on Substack. I can't remember what the name of the blog is, but it's good. And it's paywalled, but he does give you like a huge part of his article for free, so you can.
There's a big chunk of it.
But I do think that's compelling. Male wages maybe. There's also just like I was reading something else today, not about fertility, but it was just about the lack of relationships people are in. Like there's just a drop in relationships, people having sex, people having any kind of romantic partnership. So it just feels like what's going on, there's something going on where maybe some of that's post-pandemic and maybe it's generational, but it does, so he doesn't really go into that. And I don't, but obviously if people aren't even having romantic relationships, how are we going to get kids? So
he would say, men are horny brain. What did he say? Like men, with social media and men are more horny brains and the women are, Instagramming. So.
Right.
What is that?
But then you think like, is that true everywhere? Like maybe across the developed world, maybe in China, but I don't know. So you can't say that there's like an American specific issue.
Right.
I mean, there could be, but obviously it's happening everywhere and it's happening worse in other countries. So like you can't come up with these national sort of explanations. And like, what about societies where they have social media and they're still having a bunch of kids? Like what, so... like Africa has social media, right? And they're still more than reproducing. So just feels like you kind of get this sense like you get why people aren't having more kids, but you also can't definitively show any evidence about consistently why that's happening. Right. It's a very elusive issue. I find it very intriguing.
There's no hardcore research, right? There's no evidence to it, as you say.
So I have a suspicion that we won't be able to fix it because we don't really understand what's happening. And I would guarantee that almost every policy proposed is probably not going to work.
Yeah. So when he talks about male wages, I mean, people might not, I think it's important to explain why does he say male wages matter? Because again, women generally, we're making our own money now. A lot of women can provide. I mean, it's not easy. It's difficult, but women are working. Women can provide for themselves and their families. But even if they don't want kids, he's basically saying, why would you want to...
I think that's right.
...be with a deadbeat who is still living in mom's basement and is working at Chili's, right? It's just not attractive whether you want to have kids or not, so the male wage connection, I think it's also interesting, and it's not what I thought he was going to say, just reading the title.
Right. So if the commander were some deadbeat and couldn't bring home the bacon, right, as cool and Catalan as he is, right, he still wouldn't be acceptable, right? He'd be a deadbeat.
Yeah, he'd be a deadbeat. And he would say, you're such a hypocrite. You're like, I want to go out and do what I want to do. And I want to, you can't tell me what to do. But yet, if he weren't providing something, I'm going to be honest, if he were
out the door with a commander,
right?
That's why you have to set up that's why you have to set up the Handmaid's Tale, so you don't have the choice. Right?
It's interesting.
Okay, so I did speculate on one policy I think would work preemptively, but I think it's so dystopian. I don't think we should actually do it.
This is the incendiary part I was referring to. Are you talking about the marriage subsidy?
Yeah. So I say, look, what's the ultimate problem here? The ultimate problem is we don't have enough workers to subsidize people's old age benefits. So I say, you don't have kids, you don't get old age benefits, or you don't get as much.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a hard one.
You have one kid, you get the Medicare hospital plan, but if you have two, you get the drug benefit, And obviously I think that's a little bit of a Swiftian modest proposal kind of thing, but I don't think we would do that. But I think we will effectively do that because we won't make it a policy, but like I said, I think the system will get so devalued that you'll have to have kids to support you. And so we'll effectively have that policy, even though it's not explicitly adopted.
Now, what about all the people, and I'll say women just because it's easier to say, what about the women out there who don't want to get married, or men who don't want to get married? But what about people who don't want to get married?
The cat ladies and men. Yeah.
Yes. Like, what about the cat ladies and the cat men, the cat dudes?
Well, I think that they're in the ascendants, right? So it's that's why I'm saying the bet is long cats, short babies. Sure. Right?
I love the title. or women, saying, Trish, women traditionally in a marriage, even in 2025 in Western society, bear the brunt of the domestic work, the parenting.
What are you talking about, Tonya? I do everything.
The emotional labor, Alan, the emotional labor,
My nickname in the house is reading iPad, so that's my Native American name, reading iPad. My wife says doesn't answer cell phone. That's so serious. Yeah, no, I think it's true, right? So hey, look, I'm not here telling anybody what they have to do. I'm just saying if people don't want to have kids, we're not going to have any babies. We're not going to have anybody to support us. So there's going to be a lot of dark stuff that happens as a result of that. So I think, the reality is I'm pro-human. I want us to have more people in the world. So, and I want the human race to continue. So instead of picking through a dystopian nightmare of abandoned apartment buildings filled with now ownerless cats, we're going to have all these cats and all the cat ladies and guys will die.
Right.
And it's only J.D. Vance and his kids that will survive, right? So they'll be picking through these, cat littered abandoned apartment buildings. So they won't even be filled with Haitian immigrants at this point. It'll be just cats. So
be like a new pet cemetery, a new kind of pet cemetery.
So I don't know. So obviously you can't go out and tell people they have to have kids. And I'm not sitting here telling people. Look, I believe in the Arnold Kling. He's an economist. He has an awesome Substack too. And he always said the real benefit of having kids is having grandchildren. And he's really pro grandchildren, but you got to have kids to have grandchildren.
You got it right.
Sort of. Yeah. So I think that I think the benefit is awesome. And I think you should definitely do it. But yeah, you can't force people. Right. So, and it feels like you can't really incentivize people unless you get down to hardcore, hey, you're not going to have any money when you're older. And, we should cover, I guess, some of the things McKinsey was talking about we're going to have to do to try to deal with this until the system collapses, basically, is, first, I think they're saying like, we're going to have to get old people to work more, right? And we kind of mentioned that earlier. And I think that's gotten limited. I think we will do that, right? But the idea is if you're going from 3-4 workers supporting a retiree down to below 2, I don't think the math works out for you to do 10 hours at Home Depot until you're 70, right? No, it means you're going to have to work full time until you're 75 or 77 or 80, right?
Here is people work not, getting the part-time job after retirement for a few hours.
Right.
You can see that in Somerville where we lived before moving here. I mean, the Market Basket, Market Basket. You see a lot of, I love that place. Shout out to the Basket. But, you see on the weekends,
Go get your mother a cat.
Go. Go. But you see like older people, on Sundays, in their 70s, like bagging your groceries. I mean, there's something also a little sad about that, unless you think, oh no, he's just bored.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely happening. It's already happening, right? So I think the first stage is going to be people kind of working part-time later in life. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's great. I mean, keeps you more engaged, gives you something to do, a social network outlet. I'm really suspicious of this, because that's not solving the problem. That's just going to make like a little percentage point difference. But, what they're talking about in the paper is like, productivity increases for old people. And look, to be honest, their productivity goes down because they don't adopt new techniques very quickly. And I just think like at some point they get tired and they're going to say, look, Joe Biden was only working till 4, right? So he was the president, for God's sakes. And he couldn't work all the time. So I think they're just going to opt to be poorer. And I think that sucks, but I think that's what's going to happen. It's like they're going to have to do some amount of work to keep going, but I think they're slowly just going to opt to be poorer over time. And that's what used to happen, right? Yeah. So I think that's one result that we're going to see. And I just don't see, I guess some people think like AI will come in and supplement what older people do enough to improve their productivity. Yeah, I mean, there'll be some benefit.
But that's tough. I mean, people are, younger people my age have a hard time.
Right.
Really.
Yeah.
I mean, change is hard and AI is still new and scary. Imagine your 70-something-year-old grandpa.
Yeah, exactly. No.
Trying to
I mean, I can't even imagine you trying to use AI.
I know, right? Last week I was Googling it. No, I'm kidding.
So I don't know. I mean, I think, AI is great and it will help, right? It'll do a little bit, but I don't know. Like I was reading about a couple of weeks ago, even key technologies like computers, the internet, electricity, steam engine, you're talking 0.5 to 1% increases in GDP. I don't think we've seen productivity really grow outside of, I don't know, I guess in China, when you have someone who starves the population and doesn't educate them for 30 years, you can get a lot of productivity real quick. But in an advanced society, you're going to see 0.5% increases. And when you're talking about massive population collapse, it just doesn't seem like it's up to the challenge of solving the problem in any kind of time frame that would help. So yeah, I think this is one of my more pessimistic conclusions. So my base case is we just go along, growth slows, older people get poorer, the burden on younger people gets worse. And we're living in a, definitely maybe not as great a world as we could, right? Maybe it's better than now, but I don't think it's anywhere near as good as it could be if we were able to solve this problem. But then there's a part of me that's yeah, but all trends change. And just you don't know why the fertility rate went down, maybe it'll go back up and you don't know why.
And we won't know why. Yeah, and you won't know why. I mean, there are those out there that will be happy, the decline in population. There are those out there who'll be where this is going to be good for the planet.
cares? I mean, I'm like, so the planet's going to thank you 100 years after you're dead? Like,
I'm not saying I agree
I
with
don't get
that.
those people.
Yeah, just
I call those people silly.
Silly people.
Yes. No, I think that's a common refrain from young people who don't understand the implications of what's coming. But I do see like trends change. And so like our ability to project, just like I'm like, how does some demographer in the McKinsey and Census Bureau of the world, whatever that does it, how are they able to see what fertility rates in Sub-Saharan Africa are going to be in 2100? Like they have no idea, right? They're just taking a current trend and projecting it out. And that is, you know, in most cases, that doesn't really work very well because you end up, things change, right? And so projecting out, extrapolation is, again, Russell Napier always said that that's what gets you in trouble. And so like, it could be the trend just changes. And like, if we just get like a couple of generations, like a generation or two, but you have a big generation coming behind it and it's growing again, maybe that's much more recoverable, right? That's a blip more than a long-term shift. It also could be that we all live forever and have our you know, our consciousness loaded up to one of Elon's robots.
That's something we could look forward to.
Yes, I look forward to being a metal robot and being invincible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. So, I mean, that could happen too. And, you know, if you have huge increases in lifespan, you don't have as many people dying. Now, it would also have to come with the ability to work so we can produce things.
Right. I don't know. I don't see, I mean, I think we would have to look to other parts of the world. You know, I don't see anything changing in Western countries. I think it's going to get worse and worse as all of this is pointing out. But because, you know, it's not like we're doing things, at least in the US, we're not on a trajectory to increase incentives or, you know, social safety nets and supports to make people want to.
Well, so I think the US probably has the best strategy, which we are currently in the middle of
destroying.
Not destroying. I mean, we go through waves, right, of immigration.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't think anything that's happening now is permanent, right?
Right.
So, as I said, in 2018, immigration was super popular, right? And so now it's not. And in 2 years after we see kids in cages and people, you know, hardworking people getting deported, we'll probably be sympathetic again. And I'm not saying anything political about how we do immigration or how much, you know, whatever. That's a political process. But the reality is the US is able to import and integrate workers in a much better way than Europe can.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And for whatever reasons. And it just feels like Europe is, in Asia, you know, Japan, they have gotten more immigrants, but I mean, talk about a racist society. I mean, come on. And China has similar issues. So like, I just don't see immigration being viable for a lot of these cultures, or maybe it becomes viable at some point, but it's after like the system is completely broken.
Yeah, way down the road. That's I don't see that.
Go look at what's happening in Germany right now. So you know, and I know you live in Spain, so you know better than I, but it just doesn't feel like Europeans they probably rather just get poor and then have a bunch of immigrants come in. Is my take.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. So, I mean, I'm like, it feels like that's the policy you chose, right? I know you live there, so you don't want water cannons in your window, but I do feel like that's sort of the choice. And like,
they're closed. So
that's right. That's good. So yeah, it feels like that's where we're going. And my hope is we're just wrong about the long-term projections, or there's this technical solution where people live longer and they're much more productive, and then you don't need as many babies, right? You know, so those are the real only hopes, but I see nothing right now that looks like it's going to stop it.
Yeah, I wonder what other people thinking about this, if they are. Like, what would people say to some of these proposals?
Well, I mean, I think you see the proposals, right, that are out there. So you got Orban is the only one in Europe doing anything. It's not working. The Scandinavian countries have done a ton on the social support side. You know, it's helped a little bit, not working. Other people are just ignoring it, you know, and I don't think it's in the zeitgeist of the population. It's not something you read about. Like these kind of slow bleed problems that happen over a generation or two just don't get the attention. But I don't know, maybe at some point it becomes like a climate change type of issue.
Mm-hmm. You could.
But I do think progressives don't like the issue because it feels pro-family and kind of conservative coded natalism. And Livingstone certainly seems like a conservative. I don't know that much about him, but so I think that's one of the issues, is that intellectuals tend to be progressive and favor progressive causes, and this is not coded that way. And maybe it will be at some point. That would actually be interesting.
But not the way it is now, certainly. Mm-hmm.
How could you code? One thing you could do to get it into the conversation more is to code it as more progressive. And then professors in the media would want to talk about it. That is certainly not, And there's all this stuff where you talk about like male wages, like feminists are not going to want to hear about how men need to get paid more, right?
Right. I mean, it's just on the surface of it, it's a tough thing to sell, at least from a progressive perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's maybe one of the issues. That's one of the issues. It's like, I think progressives have just the way we've conceived of everything. It feels like they're happy to see it happen. And I think that's a mistake because all of their social programs are going to collapse.
Yeah.
So
it's so interesting.
At what point will they realize, ooh, this is not going to work? We got to do something different. That's an issue. I didn't write about that, but
so that's another, I was going to say, that's another thing, like how to see this from the progressive point of view.
Yeah. I think that you get this like feminist, male kind of conflict that's bad for them. There's like the environmental piece of like, oh, the planet would be better. I think they're just generally not pro-growth, I mean, that's not 100% true, but, definitely there's like a degrowth kind of element in the progressive movement. Like a lot of the things now, giving huge benefits to women or families, paternity leave, maternity leave, social supports, blah, blah, blah. That's progressive.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't seem to work, but, at least maybe something like that would at least get the attention on it. So I guess that would probably be my guess, is how you would progressive code it, as you turn it into like social benefit language. And then they would probably support it. But it doesn't seem like it would fix the problem.
Well, won't fix the problem necessarily, but it would be a good conversation.
That's right. But awesome real estate opportunities in about 30 to 40 years, basically anywhere you want to go. Just have to kick out the counts.
There you go.
Then you're good. Yeah. Then you got my grandkids can live wherever the hell they want,
Absolutely.
Sub-Saharan Africa, there's going to be nowhere to go there. But
and would you want to?
Hey, of course I would.
Yes.
But there's parts, South Africa, Namibia, beautiful.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true.
Angola's on the up these days, so I shouldn't make fun of it. But
well, we're just joking.
Yes, we're just joking. But, I guess that's it for today. So no more babies, long cats, short babies. Go Dubai. You're
betting the end. Bet long on cat.
Long cats, short babies. Excellent. Well, that's it. Talk to you soon.
I'll talk to you soon, Alan.
You've been listening to The New Rules with Alan Pentz. For more insights on mastering the new game, follow @APentz, that's APENTZ, on X, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, in today's world, you don't follow the rules, you write them.